Greetings, Star Wars community. Today we're going to be talking about what has been happening in the world of Star Wars since the movie The Last Jedi. Disney has put out a couple of books that have told us a little bit more about what the Resistance has been up to since they lost their battle in Crate, how they're going to get to the point of what we're going to see in the Rise of Skywalker. Now, are these books worth the read? Stick around and find out. Sit down and hit that hyperdrive because Star Wars Road Reviews starts now. Now, before we go any further, this is your spoiler warning. I will be talking about some of the major plot points that are included in these books. I will be talking about some of the characters and some of the things that they do and how it leads into the movie The Rise of Skywalker and the greater Star Wars canon in general. For those of you that don't know, since Disney purchased The Rise of Star Wars, they have been publishing books that tell you a little bit more about the characters that we love in the Star Wars universe. Some of these stories are amazing, some of them are just okay, and then some of them you can just completely skip. We'll be doing another video later on about some of the books that we highly recommend that you guys check out, because you'll love to know what some of your favorite characters in the Star Wars universe have been up to in between the movies and the comic books and the video games, because all of that now, since they were purchased by Disney, are considered official canon. That being said, the first book that we're going to be talking about is Resistance Reborn, written by Rebecca Roanhorse, published by Del Rey Books. The book picks up immediately after the Battle of Crate, or maybe just a couple of days or a few weeks after the Battle of Crate in The Last Jedi. We know that the Resistance was defeated there. At that point, they had no more ships left. The only thing that they had left at the time was the Millennium Falcon that was being piloted by Rey. From the previews of what we've seen in the movie The Rise of Skywalker, we know that the Resistance has rebuilt their fleet and they're going to go up against the First Order. But how did they get to this point? And that is what this book is particularly going to address. But does it do it successfully? No, it does not. I can tell you right now that the Resistance is not reborn in this book. Even though the title says that the Resistance is reborn, it is not. The Resistance is in a terrible state even at the end of this book. Now, that's not to say that this book is a total failure. We do get some important information that answers questions that many of us had after The Last Jedi. For example, why didn't any of Leia's allies answer the call to respond and help them when they were on Crate during the movie The Last Jedi? That's one thing that always lingered in my mind, and this book does tell you exactly why that happened. So it turns out that prior to the events of The Last Jedi, the First Order had already been trying to collect major allies of the Resistance. They had been killing them, they had been kidnapping them, and not just people that had been associated with the rebellion, but people that they thought might be associated with the rebellion, or that at one point or another they may cause a problem for the First Order. This included known rebels or people that they thought were rebels, senators they may have been aligned with the rebels at one point or another, or they thought they might be able to align themselves with the rebellion. This also included former Imperials, which we do see a lot about in this book. And lastly, anybody else that might have had anything bad to say about the First Order. The main character in this book was Poteet, and this is probably the thing that I like the most about this book, even though there are a lot of things that I really didn't like about it. And we do get a lot of information about characters like Leia, Rey, Finn, Rose, all those characters that we saw in The Last Jedi, and other characters that have been mentioned before in other Star Wars properties. But Poe Dameron is the main character in this book, and it's important to know that his story is a redemption story for this book. Now, this book does a very good job of telling us about Poe Dameron's internal struggle that he's been dealing with since the movie The Last Jedi. He feels like a failure because it is his responsibility that the whole fleet was destroyed. It is his responsibility that they lost so many lives because of his decisions. It's very cool to see that he does care about what he's done and that he's willing to own up to it. It's very cool to see that he has that path towards being a better leader for the Resistance, and that Leia trusts him to lead the Resistance if anything were to happen to her. Now, we do get information on General Leia and what she's been going through in her internal struggle as well, about how she's dealing with the loss of Luke, the loss of her entire fleet, and the fact that the Resistance is just down to one ship. But the thing that she has been struggling with the most is trying to find an ally, because it seems that nobody has been responding to her. We know that she hasn't heard from any of her allies and nobody came to her aid. She was wondering if maybe they decided not to help her out at all, or if maybe they were dead. But she does manage to find some allies that are willing to take the Resistance in, even if temporarily, that are going to become major allies of the Resistance later on. Poe and Leia are the two people that we get the most information about regarding this story. Now, we do get information about Rey, we do get information about Finn and about Rose and some of the other characters that we've learned about in the Star Wars universe, but their stories of what they tell us a little bit about them is very little. I didn't like what they did with the character of Rey in this book at all, because in The Last Jedi we saw that she was able to control the Force to an extent that we hadn't seen her before. We see that she's trying to train herself. We see in the previews of The Rise of Skywalker that she has now mastered the Force in a sense, and that she's really trying to get control of her skills. But we don't get any information about what Rey has been doing as far as training, or any information about how she's been using the Force or trying to make herself stronger in the Force. It feels like she regressed back to way before The Force Awakens. It feels like she knew more about the Force or was more in tune with the Force in The Force Awakens than she was in this book, which is taking place after The Last Jedi. Now, I don't know if this is going to make it into The Rise of Skywalker, but in this book, which is considered canon, we do find out that Rose and Finn are not a couple. In fact, they're just friends. They talked about it, that they thought about the idea of being more than just friends, but ultimately they settled on the fact that they weren't good together. So I don't know if that's actually going to make it into The Rise of Skywalker, but that was one thing that was like, why would you put that as a major thing in the second movie only to kill it in one page of a novel that nobody's gonna read, and then I don't know what they're gonna do in the movie The Rise of Skywalker. But one of the things that I really did enjoy about this book is how they reference a lot of the characters that are from the expanded Star Wars universe that currently exists. That includes the comic books, the video games. So if you've ever played Battlefront 2 or Jedi Fallen Order, those characters or references to the games themselves or events that happen in those games are referenced in this book, and I thought that was pretty cool. Characters from Rebels, characters from the Clone Wars, characters from the prequels, characters from the original trilogy. Stuff that you wouldn't recognize immediately, but once you start reading and you start putting them into context, it plays a lot into how this book becomes a little bit more enjoyable. Ultimately, the book is kind of well written. You do get a beginning and you do get an end, but it's not the end that we were hoping for, and it's not the information that we were hoping for based on the title. What we do get to see at the end of this book is that they've obtained the information that is needed to be able to get those people that the First Order has been kidnapping, and that's what they're going to be focusing on after this book. But we don't have that information about what happens and how they acquire those people. I'm assuming that that information happens and we'll notice it only at the movie The Rise of Skywalker. On the scale from the must read to burn it, I would totally put this in the category of keep it as a spare log in case your fire dies out. The story is good, don't get me wrong, but it is kind of a skippable story. If you do really want to tackle the book, know that I highly recommend that you do listen to the audiobook instead of just reading it, because it is so much better to hear the books than it is to read them when it comes to Star Wars, because of the fact that they use special effects, that you can hear the sounds of the TIE fighters and the battles that are going on while the book is being read to you. And sometimes they'll bring some of the original actors' voices, or whoever's reading the book does a very good job of mimicking those actors' voices, and you can kind of picture it when you're trying to listen to. Keep in mind though that this is about 12 hours long, so if you want to invest that time, I do recommend the book only if you really care about some of the characters that I mentioned. However, remember that this book mainly focuses on Poe and Princess Leia, with the main focus really being Poe. Now, the next book that we're going to talk about is Spark of the Resistance by Justina Ireland. I'm going to go ahead and rate this book already for you, and I'm going to tell you, add it to the kill it with fire pile. This is a terrible book. It's a terrible story, and it disrespects Star Wars by just existing. The book focuses on three characters. That would be Rey, Poe, and Rose, and they are supposed to be on a supply run that's supposed to be bringing supplies back to the rebellion that they so desperately need. But along the way, they intercept a distress call from a planet called Minfar, where the residents say that they are under attack from the First Order. Being part of the rebellion and not wanting to leave people out there on their own without assistance, they decide to go and help the planet just in case they may be able to become allies for them in the future. From the very beginning of this book, from when they hear the distress call, the book becomes extremely predictable and the story just becomes something completely unoriginal. Now, the book is supposed to be a junior novel, therefore it's supposed to be for younger audiences. That explains the type of language that is used in the book, but it does not justify the bad storytelling and the fact that they focus so much on describing every single detail of what's surrounding the characters at the time they're on the planet. They're walking down the forest and you get a full description of all the flowers, what colors they are, and all this other stuff that's going to be completely unimportant to the story. Some of the monsters that our heroes have to face off with are completely ridiculous in the way that they are described. Feathers that are made out of gems, that is completely impenetrable armor, and whenever you shoot them, the lasers bounce back. But the worst thing is how they treat the characters, particularly Rey and Poe Dameron. In Resistance Reborn, we just got the side of Poe Dameron that we've been waiting to see for a long time. A much better version of Poe Dameron than what we've seen in the movies. It's a Poe Dameron that feels like he needs to redeem himself for the things that he did, for the mistakes that he made. He's very humble about it. He's not a person who likes to glorify himself or his talents. But in this book, it's a complete opposite of what we learn. He's a cocky guy. He's a guy that wants to do everything by himself. He thinks that it's awesome to be famous and to be recognized. That completely goes against what we just learned from the movies themselves and from the book that we just finished reading. And Rey is whinier than I have ever seen her. She reminds me of Anakin in the prequels.
I don't like sand. It's coarse rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
She doesn't know how to use the Force fully. She doesn't know whether she can trust it or whether she can trust herself. She's not sure about her feelings and where they're leading her to. She doesn't know how to interpret her emotions. It's just kind of like, decide already what kind of character you want her to be. Rose was treated fairly well. We don't know her character all too much, but I feel like this version of Rose that we saw in this book was a lot better than what we got in the movie of Last Jedi. That's all I can really say about Rose in this book. She does an okay job as being a supporter to the team. She's a mechanic, but at the same time, they do give her the ability to be more than just that by being an adventurer and being able to hold her own in a fight. Ultimately, the story goes is that they go to the planet, they assist the people from the planet against the First Order, they do gain some allies, and they destroy a weapon that would have been beneficial, but at the same time would have been cruel to own. It's a dumb story, and I can honestly tell you that you can skip it and you won't miss a single thing, and you'll wish that it would never exist in this universe. All in all, I don't think Disney did a very good job of letting us know what happened in between the movies The Last Jedi all the way up to The Rise of Skywalker. Now, I really do hope that we do get a little bit more information, even if it's after that the movie comes out. There generally are better filler stories in between. I know that the comic books tell you a little bit more about what happens in between, but there's so much information out there that people don't know about that connects to the major Star Wars universe that is part of the canon. Of these two books, honestly, the only one I would honestly kind of recommend would be Resistance Reborn, because it does touch on all of the other things that the Star Wars universe has touched on before. Like I said, if you're a fan of the video games or the comic books and all the other things that are in the Star Wars universe, that stuff will be referenced in this book. And I do recommend it if you are a fan of all those things, but I don't necessarily recommend it if you haven't read any of those other items before, because you're not going to be missing much, or you're not going to understand a lot of the references. That's all I have to say about these books, and I do hope that you enjoyed my review of them. If you do want to check out these books, I definitely recommend that you check out the audio versions of these books, because it's the only way, honestly, that you're really going to enjoy these books in particular. I'll leave a link in the description down below so you guys can check out where you can get these books. Be on the lookout for more reviews on books in the Star Wars universe that I'm definitely going to tell you to add to your collect pile, and others that I'm going to add to the logfire pile. With that said, don't forget to share this video with others so that they can check it out as well. Leave a like down below and subscribe to the channel. I can't wait to make more videos and share them all with you, and as always, can't wait to have you back at Star Wars Row Reviews.